My name is Thomas Whittaker. I'm 63 years old now, but this story begins back when I was just 43. I never imagined I'd be sitting here, in front of a camera, telling strangers about the most horrific discovery of my entire life. But here I am, and I feel I need to share this, to finally let this burden go, to warn others. It's funny, how we can live in a place for years and its secrets remain completely unknown to us. From the outside, the house on Oakwood Lane looked perfectly ordinary. A two-story Victorian with peeling blue paint, a wraparound porch that sagged a little on the east side, and a garden that had seen much better days. I inherited it from my Aunt Meredith after she passed away, rather suddenly. A heart attack, they said. No one questioned it. I remember the day I moved in, July 17, 2005. The air was thick with humidity, a storm brewing on the horizon. The moving company had cancelled at the last minute, so I was left to haul all of my belongings inside completely by myself. By nightfall, I had only managed to bring in the essentials, a mattress, some clothes, and a few kitchen items. Sweating and exhausted, I collapsed onto that bare mattress, listening to the old house creaking all around me. That very first night, I heard the scratching. It was faint, so faint I convinced myself it was just tree branches against the siding, or maybe mice. Old houses always have mice, right? The house needed work, a lot of it. In her final years, Aunt Meredith hadn't been able to maintain it properly. In most rooms, the wallpaper was peeling. The hardwood floors were scuffed beyond repair, and a persistent musty smell seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves. But it was mine now, and I was determined to restore it to its former glory. I should mention that I work from home as a technical writer. I've always been a bit of a loner, so the isolation never bothered me. In fact, I preferred it. My neighbors, the Hendersons and the Callahans, tried to welcome me with casseroles and barbecue invitations, but I always politely declined. I hadn't moved to Millfield for the social scene. I wanted quiet. I wanted to be left alone with my work in my house. The first few months were dedicated purely to the essentials, fixing the leaky roof, replacing the ancient water heater, updating the electrical system, basic survival stuff. But once winter passed and spring arrived, my attention turned to the cosmetic issues. I started with the living room, carefully stripping away decades of accumulated wallpaper. That's when I first noticed the wall's strange texture. Behind the wallpaper, instead of plaster or drywall, was a rough, uneven surface. I assumed it was just old-fashioned construction methods. After all, the house had been built in 1887. I covered it with a layer of modern drywall and painted over it. Problem solved. Or so I thought. The scratching continued. Sometimes at night, sometimes during the day, always just on the edge of hearing. I convinced myself it was the house settling or maybe squirrels in the attic. I set traps but never caught a thing. Years passed. Room by room, I worked my way through the house, updating and repairing. The kitchen took nearly 6 months. The upstairs bathroom, with its clawfoot tub and intricate tile work, took almost a full year to restore properly. I became obsessed with doing everything the right way, preserving what could be saved and carefully updating what couldn't. The house became my life's work. I didn't have many visitors. My parents had passed away years before, and I never married or had children. Occasionally, a colleague would stop by, or a delivery person would comment on the improvements they could see from the porch. "You've really transformed this place," they'd say. If only they knew what was hiding beneath the surface. 10 years after moving in, I finally tackled the dining room. It was the most ornate room in the house, with elaborate crown molding and a built-in china cabinet that had seen better days. While I was removing the cabinet to repair it, I noticed a small gap in the wall behind it, just a tiny opening, maybe half an inch wide, where the wall didn't quite meet the floor. Out of curiosity, I shone a flashlight into the gap. I expected to see insulation, maybe some wiring. Instead, I saw something white and curved, something that looked disturbingly like bone. I told myself it couldn't be what I thought. Maybe it was just some animal, a raccoon or a possum, that had gotten trapped in the wall and died. That had to be it. I convinced myself to ignore it. I patched the gap with some caulk and reinstalled the cabinet. Out of sight, out of mind. But after that, the scratching got louder. And sometimes late at night, I thought I could hear whispering, faint, indistinct murmurs that seemed to come from inside the walls. I started having trouble sleeping. I would lie awake for hours, listening, wondering if I was losing my mind. I threw myself into my work, both my technical writing and the house renovations. To get through the night, I started taking sleeping pills. They dulled the sounds, or at least they dulled my awareness of them. Life went on. 5 more years passed. By then, I had worked my way through most of the house. The only rooms left were the 3 upstairs bedrooms. I had been using one as my bedroom since I moved in, leaving the other 2 for storage. I decided it was finally time to tackle my bedroom, to tear up the stained carpet, refinish the hardwood underneath, and repaint the dingy walls. I moved my bed and other furniture to one of the spare rooms and got to work. The carpet came up easily, revealing beautiful oak floors beneath. They were in surprisingly good condition, needing only a light sanding and refinishing. The walls were another story. The previous wallpaper had been stripped at some point and painted over, but the paint was bubbling in places, indicating moisture problems. As I scraped at one of these bubbles, a chunk of plaster came away in my hand, and there it was again, that strange rough texture I had noticed years before in the living room. But this time, I looked closer. The rough surface wasn't old plaster or unusual building materials. It was bone. Small bones fused together with some kind of mortar. What I had initially taken for an unusual plastering technique was actually human remains. I stumbled back, dropping my scraper. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I told myself I had to be mistaken. This couldn't be real. But as I forced myself to look again, to really look, there was no denying what I was seeing. Those were finger bones. And over there, what looked like part of a rib cage. I ran from the room, barely making it to the bathroom before I vomited. For hours, I sat on the cold tile floor, trying to process what I had seen, trying to decide what to do. The rational part of my brain said to call the police immediately. But another part of me, the part that had spent 20 years lovingly restoring this house, resisted. What would happen to my home? It would become a crime scene. It would be torn apart, its secrets exposed. And what about me? Would I be a suspect? Would people believe I had no idea what was in my walls? I decided I needed to know more before I involved the authorities. I needed to understand what I was dealing with. So, I went back to that bedroom with a hammer and began to carefully chip away at the wall. What I found was worse than I could have ever imagined. From floor to ceiling, the entire wall was lined with human bones. They had been broken into pieces and mixed with a kind of cement to form a grotesque insulation. Femurs, ribs, vertebrae, even small bones from hands and feet, all compressed together into a macabre collage. I moved to another wall, then another. They were all the same. I checked the floor below, tapping with my hammer until I found a hollow spot. I pried up the floorboards and found more bones layered between the joists. The house wasn't just insulated with bones. It was built with them. I spent that night in my car, parked at a rest stop off the highway. I couldn't bring myself to sleep in that house. Not now that I knew. The next morning, I went to the local library and began researching the history of my house. It took days of digging through old newspapers on microfiche and dusty town records. But eventually, I found something. In 1885, 2 years before my house was officially built, a doctor named Elias Blackwood purchased the land. Dr. Blackwood had run a private sanitarium in Boston before relocating to Millfield for what the newspaper called health reasons. The sanitarium records were harder to access, but with some persistence and a small donation to the Massachusetts Historical Society, I was able to view them. What I found chilled me to the bone. Dr. Blackwood's sanitarium had an unusually high mortality rate. Patients checked in with minor ailments, melancholia, feminine hysteria, nervous exhaustion, and many never checked out. Their deaths were attributed to complications or sudden decline. More disturbing still, the bodies were rarely claimed by family members. Dr. Blackwood offered to handle the burials himself for a modest fee. The records showed over 100 unclaimed bodies during the sanitarium's 10 years of operation. But there were no records of where these bodies were buried. No cemetery plots purchased. No death certificates filed with the proper authorities. They had simply disappeared. Until now. With growing horror, I realized that Dr. Blackwood hadn't moved to Millfield for his health. He had moved there to build his dream house, a house insulated with the remains of his unclaimed patients, the ultimate form of recycling. But why? Was it just practicality? Free building materials? Or was there something more sinister at work? The scratching I had heard for years, the whispering, were these the restless spirits of Blackwood's victims? I returned to the house with a new sense of purpose. I needed to document everything before contacting the authorities. I took photographs of the exposed bones in my bedroom wall. With my hammer, I checked other walls throughout the house, marking with tape the areas that sounded hollow or unusual. As I worked, I began to notice patterns. The bones weren't randomly distributed. They formed shapes, crude symbols that reminded me of the protective sigils I had seen in books about medieval superstition. Was Blackwood trying to harness some dark power? Did he believe that surrounding himself with human remains would grant him special abilities or protection? The whispering grew louder as I worked, as if the spirits knew I had discovered their secret. Sometimes I could almost make out words. Release us. Revenge, Blackwood. On my third day of investigation, I found something in the attic, a hidden compartment behind a false wall. Inside was a leather-bound journal, its pages yellow with age. It was Blackwood's diary. I spent all night reading it, unable to tear myself away despite the mounting horror. Blackwood hadn't just used the bones for practical purposes. He believed that by surrounding himself with the dead, he could absorb their life force, extend his own life, gain power over death itself. The diary detailed his experiments. How he would select patients who seemed to have the most vital energy. How he would slowly poison them, draining their life while keeping them conscious enough to experience their own demise. He believed that fear and awareness at the moment of death made the spirits more potent, more useful for his purposes. The diary's final pages became increasingly incoherent. Blackwood wrote about hearing voices, feeling watched. He became convinced that the spirits were plotting against him. The last entry, dated September 3, 1905, simply read, "They are in the walls. They are waiting. They know." There was no record of what happened to Blackwood after that. According to town records, the house stood empty for several years before being purchased by a family named Whitmore in 1912. They lived there for only 8 months before selling it at a significant loss. After that, the house changed hands repeatedly, never owned by the same family for more than a few years, until it came to my Aunt Meredith in 1978. My aunt had lived in the house for 27 years. Had she known about the bones? Had she heard the scratching, the whispering? She had always been a private person, keeping to herself much as I did. Had she discovered the truth and chosen to keep it secret? Or had the house claimed her, too, as it had claimed so many others? I thought about the heart attack that had taken her so suddenly. I thought about the strange dreams I'd been having since moving in, dreams of suffocation, of walls closing in around me. Had the house been trying to claim me as well? I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I called the police. At first, they didn't believe me. The detective who came to take my statement looked at me like I was crazy. But when I showed him the exposed wall in my bedroom, the color drained from his face. Within hours, my house was swarming with police officers, forensic technicians, and eventually, representatives from the State Historical Society and a team of archaeologists. The investigation took months. They carefully dismantled sections of wall throughout the house, documenting and preserving the remains they found. The final count was staggering. Bones from at least 137 individuals were recovered. Men, women, even children, all buried within the walls, floors, and ceilings of my home. DNA testing was attempted, but after more than a century, there wasn't much viable genetic material to work with. Still, they managed to identify a few individuals based on dental records and unique physical characteristics noted in Blackwood sanitarium files. Most of the victims remained anonymous, forgotten souls whose final resting place had been my house. I couldn't live there anymore, of course. I moved into a small apartment in town while the investigation continued. The house was eventually declared a crime scene and then a historical site of significant importance. There was talk of turning it into a museum, but local residents protested. In the end, the decision was made to respectfully remove all the remains for proper burial and then demolish the house. I watched from across the street as they tore it down. 20 years of my life, reduced to rubble in a matter of hours. I should have felt sad, I suppose, but mostly I felt relief. The whispering had stopped. The scratching was gone. The victims of Dr. Blackwood could finally rest in peace. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear them. Not from the walls now, but in my dreams. They whisper to me about Blackwood, about his experiments, about the power he sought to harness. They tell me that destroying the house wasn't enough. That part of Blackwood's essence, and the essence of his victims, was absorbed into the very soil of that property. Nothing has been built on that land since the demolition. The town council rezoned it as a small park with a discreet memorial to the victims, but nothing grows there. The grass withers, flowers refuse to bloom. Birds avoid it. Even insects seem to give it a wide berth. And sometimes when I walk past, because I still do, I can't seem to stay away, I think I can see shapes moving just beneath the surface of the soil, reaching up, trying to break free, trying to be heard. I've never told anyone this next part. After the house was demolished, I took something from the rubble. Just a small piece of plaster with a fragment of bone embedded in it. A keepsake, I told myself. A reminder. I keep it in a box in my closet. Sometimes late at night, I take it out and hold it in my hand. And I swear it feels warm to the touch, alive somehow. Last week, I noticed something strange. The fragment of bone seems to be growing, extending tiny tendrils into the plaster around it, like roots seeking soil. And when I hold it now, I can hear the whispering more clearly than ever. They're telling me about Blackwood's ultimate goal, not just to extend his life, but to transcend death entirely. To become something new, something neither living nor dead. They're telling me that he succeeded, in a way, that parts of him and them live on, seeking new vessels, new walls to inhabit. I should get rid of it, throw it away, burn it, bury it at a crossroads like they did with vampires in the old stories. But I can't bring myself to part with it. It's the last piece of my house, the last 20 years of my life. And sometimes I think I understand what Blackwood was trying to do. Not the murder, not the cruelty, those were unforgivable. But the desire to leave a mark on the world, to ensure that something of yourself remains after you're gone. I'm 63 now. I live alone in a small apartment with blank white walls that I'm not allowed to modify per my lease agreement. I have no children, no legacy to leave behind. When I die, what will remain of Thomas Whittaker? I've started to hear scratching in my apartment walls. Just faint at first, easy to dismiss, but getting louder each night. And sometimes when I press my ear against the drywall, I can hear new voices joining the chorus. Young voices, modern voices. The bones are spreading, reaching out, finding new victims. And I don't know if I want to stop them anymore. I'm telling this story now because I think it might be too late for me. The whispers are in my head now, not just in the walls. I find myself standing in hardware stores, looking at hammers and saws, imagining how easy it would be to create my own insulation, my own legacy. So, consider this a warning. If you live in an old house, particularly in New England where Blackwood may have had disciples, check your walls carefully. Look for unusual textures. Listen for scratching, for whispers. And if you find anything, run. Don't try to investigate like I did. Don't try to understand. Just get out while you still can. Because the bones are patient. They have all the time in the world, and they're always looking for new walls to inhabit. One last thing. If you're watching this and something happens to me, if I disappear or if they find me having committed acts I wouldn't normally commit, know that it wasn't really me. It was Blackwood. It was the bones. They found a new home in me. 6 months later. Realtor, and this is the master bedroom. Recently renovated with all new drywall and a fresh coat of paint. The previous owner was quite the handyman. Woman, it's beautiful. I love how solid the walls feel. You don't get construction like this in new builds. Man, who did you say lived here before? Realtor, a Mr. Whittaker. Thomas Whittaker. Quiet gentleman. Kept to himself. Moved out rather suddenly about 6 months ago. Left no forwarding address. Woman, it's perfect, honey. I can already see us living here. Man, do you hear that? Woman, hear what? Man, I thought I heard scratching, like something in the walls. Realtor, laughs nervously, probably just the house settling. These old places, they're always making noise. Nothing to worry about. Woman, I love it. It feels like the house wants us here. Like it's been waiting for us. As they continue talking, the fresh paint on the wall bulges slightly, then subsides, as if something is pushing against it from within. The faint sound of whispering can be heard. Inside the wall is a grotesque mixture of plaster, modern materials, and what appear to be fresh human bones. Among them, barely visible, is a familiar fragment, the piece that Thomas Whittaker kept as a souvenir. A small section of bone with a name carved into it in tiny letters, Blackwood. A construction site. Workers are breaking ground for a new housing development. As the excavator digs into the soil, it unearths what appears to be old building materials, fragments of wood, nails, and something else. Something white and curved. Construction worker, hey, boss. You might want to see this. Foreman, what you got? Construction worker, I think we might need to call someone. Asterisk the name of the development is on a large sign, Whittaker Estates, luxury homes, starting in the 500s. The development is being built on the site of what was once a small memorial park. The memorial stone is visible, half buried in a pile of dirt. The inscription reads, in memory of the victims of the Blackwood House. May they rest in peace. Asterisk. The sound of whispering grows louder as the screen fades to black for the final time.